Just imagine for a second, a friend you've known your entire life suddenly starts speaking a totally different language. And I mean fluently, a real language that you know for a fact they've never, ever learned. It sounds like science fiction, right? Well, what if I told you there are carefully documented cases of this actually happening? We're about to dive into one of the most baffling mysteries on record.
And look, this is not just some hypothetical scenario. This is Uttara Hudar, a 32-year-old woman from India. Her case, which you see documented right here in this 1979 academic report, became one of the most puzzling cases ever studied. She was a typical Marathi-speaking woman until one day, she just wasn't.
And this is where the story takes a truly bizarre turn. It's like a switch flipped. A completely new personality emerged, one who called herself Sharada. Now this Sharada had no idea who Uttara was and couldn't speak a word of her native language, Marathi. Instead, she spoke perfect, fluent Bengali, a language investigators confirmed Uttara had absolutely no exposure to. She even started recalling this other life, describing a family and events from way back in the early 1800s.
So this incredible phenomenon actually has a name. It's called Xenoglossy. And we're not talking about just babbling or making up some weird sounds. No, this is the ability to speak or even write in a real, identifiable language that is completely unknown to the person. It is, without a doubt, one of the most extraordinary claims in the study of human consciousness.
Uttara's story is wild. But believe it or not, she's not alone. Not by a long shot. Researchers have documented dozens of these cases over the years. You've got Burmese twins who, as little kids, would chat with each other in Japanese, a language no one in their village had ever heard. They claim they were Japanese soldiers who died in World War II. Or how about a kid in Canada who started using words from Gitsin, an indigenous language so rare that fewer than 700 people on Earth can understand it?
So when you're faced with stories like this, stories that seem to just completely defy any rational explanation, where do you even start? You can't just take it at face value, but you also can't just dismiss it.
I mean, think about it. The claims are so out there that your standard of evidence has to be sky high. So researchers really had to figure out a way to tackle this seriously without any bias creeping in.
What they landed on is a method that looks a whole lot like a forensic investigation. The number one goal is total objectivity. They collect every single piece of data they can get their hands on, interviews, medical records, police reports, you name it. They have to be, as one expert put it, scrupulously accurate, which means they are incredibly careful to separate what is a verifiable fact from what is just someone's opinion. And of course, they document everything.
Okay, so before we jump to any wild conclusions, the very first step, always, is to check the simple stuff. Is there a normal, everyday explanation for what's going on? That is just good science.
So they dug into the data from over 900 cases, looking for those logical connections. Maybe these are just kids who are exceptionally good with words. Nope, the data showed no link at all. Okay, well maybe they came from highly educated homes where they were secretly exposed to other languages. Again, nothing. The ordinary explanations just were not working, which, you have to admit, suggests something extraordinary might be going on.
So with all the simple explanations ruled out, researchers started hunting for a different kind of pattern in the data, and that led them to a really fascinating and honestly provocative new idea: the emotional trauma pathway.
And this right here is the whole ballgame. What if we've been looking at this all wrong? Maybe it's not about calmly remembering names and dates. What if the key to all this, the mechanism that makes it happen, is forged in intense, overwhelming trauma?
So this is basically the old way versus the new way of thinking. The traditional information pathway was all about those verifiable facts, a kid remembering a specific street name, for example. But this new emotional trauma pathway points to something totally different. It focuses on the cases where kids remember these awful violent deaths and show real, lasting emotional distress, like phobias and nightmares that seem tied directly to that memory.
The theory goes that an event like a violent death could be so powerful, so emotionally charged, that it literally imprints a core piece of a personality, like their native language, so deeply that it could somehow be carried over. It's not so different from how some of these kids have birthmarks that eerily match the fatal wounds of the person they claim to have been. The trauma itself seems to be the bridge.
Okay, so that's the hypothesis. It's a pretty wild idea for sure, but is there any hard evidence to back it up? Well, let's turn to the data and see what the numbers have to say.
All right, get ready for this number because it is just staggering.
In a massive analysis of 912 cases, kids who claim their past life ended violently, we're talking murder or suicide, were 2.8 times more likely to show signs of xenoglossy. That isn't a minor blip. That is a huge, flashing signal in the data.
And the connection doesn't even stop there. The data shows that the chance of xenoglossy was way higher across this whole cluster of trauma-related things. It wasn't just a violent death. It was also showing intense emotion when talking about the memories, and even a persistent painful desire to leave their current family to go back to their old one.
This chart just lays it all out so clearly. You can see these variables tied to trauma and emotional distress are strongly linked with speaking an unlearned language. And meanwhile, those ordinary explanations we talked about before, like just being good with words, there's no connection whatsoever. The pattern is undeniable, and it all points in one direction.
So let's step back for a second. What does all of this actually mean? How does this change how we think about memory, about consciousness, maybe even about what language fundamentally is?
If there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that the appearance of xenoglossy doesn't seem to be a random fluke. It's not just a collection of weird, unrelated stories. There's a real, systematic pattern here, and that pattern is consistently tied to trauma.
And the researchers who did this analysis really summed it up perfectly. They said that speaking an unlearned language seems to be directly linked to and even strengthened by emotion, distress, and trauma. This suggests the trauma isn't just part of the story. It might be the very thing that makes the whole phenomenon possible.
So what's the big picture here? Well, first, it suggests language might not just be a skill we learn, but something deeper, a core trait of our personality. Second, it proposes that really severe trauma could open a pathway for these deep traits to be transferred. And maybe most importantly, for the very first time, we have a systematic, data-driven way to explain a phenomena that has baffled people for centuries.
And all of this leaves us with one last truly mind-bending question. If something as complex and fundamental as an entire language can be imprinted and passed on through trauma, well, it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other parts of ourselves, our skills, our fears, our deepest traits might be encoded in our memories in ways we're only just beginning to grasp?